From censored files to clear evidence, this is Redacted Realms.
The eternal pain of Americans, Vietnam War Syndrome. War syndrome, or PTSD in English, was once called Vietnam Syndrome. This term emerged because no war the U.S. participated in had so many soldiers suffering from PTSD. One late day in 1974 in New York, there's a story told that people suddenly saw a young man beating a man with a severed arm. When someone ran to intervene, he looked at the badge on the man's left sleeve and asked, "Served in Vietnam, didn't?" Serves you right. That was just the fate of one among millions of soldiers returning after the Vietnam War. Although the war has been over for decades, its consequences still persist to this day. So why did they end up like this? Let's explore with D2T. The cause of this pain certainly originated from the leaders of that time. After President Harry Truman came to power, he decided to prevent the global spread of socialism. This policy began when the U.S. implemented the Truman Doctrine, aimed at protecting national security and preventing communism. So just after World War II, the entire U.S. military had to go to the Korean battlefield. Meanwhile, the U.S. saw Vietnam on the Indochina chessboard as a suitable piece in their political strategy. And naturally, they decided to move these pieces. First with France, in the documents of the U.S. National Security Council, approved by President Truman on December 30, 1949. The U.S. emphasized the need to prevent the Viet Minh in Indochina by providing political support, economic and military aid to France. Not only that, during the Dien Bien Phu campaign, the U.S. even threatened to drop atomic bombs if the Viet Minh didn't stop. However, France was completely pushed off the chessboard by Vietnam. That was an enormous shock to the American empire at that time. A small country defeating a nation. Supported with $3.5 billion over 4 years along with modern equipment. Faced with that situation, the U.S. still decided to repeat, despite many warnings from generals like Pernin. Montgomery, who even bluntly criticized leadership that America's war in Vietnam was useless. But that was because the nation's leaders believed that. From Indochina, Thailand, to all of Southeast Asia, all would gradually fall to socialism and eventually spread to America. Therefore, the U.S. intervened in South Vietnam's politics, creating the so-called Republic of Vietnam. Through many presidential terms, this policy was maintained, but by John Kennedy's time, the situation became unstable. Right after supporting the coup against the Ngo Dinh Diem government, on November 1, 1963, just 21 days later, on November 22nd, President Kennedy was assassinated in Texas. Immediately after, Johnson took over, sending the entire U.S. military. On March 8, 1965, the U.S. landed expeditionary forces in marking the beginning of the limited war phase. This was when the American people felt the gates of earthly hell. A war without clear purpose, half a world away. Under the pretext of protecting South Vietnam allies, defending democracy and world peace. However, unexpectedly, all the dark plans were exposed so quickly. It seemed that during the Vietnamese Tet holiday, our troops would not take any action. But on the night of the 30th, which was January 31, 1968, our troops attacked all important American bases along the cities and urban areas in South Vietnam, similar to how the Tay Son Army defeated 290,000 Qing troops during the Tet Khai Do in 1789. What caused the enemy to panic and fail to react in time then was the sudden appearance of our troops. Some emerged from underground, others descended from the sky, and simultaneously attacked all key bases of the Saigon government, just as they had stabilized after President Nguyen Van Thieu established the Second Republic. By this time, as the saying goes, the truth will out. The Americans had no time to prepare any scenarios to justify the sacrifices of their military in this country, but immediately was at their doorstep. From here, the wave of anger from military families spread to all American people. Not only that, they also learned about the massacres of Amerindians, war crimes such as arbitrary arrests and torture on the island, President Johnson, immediately after his crimes were exposed, was protested by people wherever he went, with draft cars. Some even asked him, "Hey Johnson, how many children have you killed today?" The tension on the American people reached its peak when Johnson was elected in 1968 with a promise to end the Vietnam War. However, on April 30, 1970, he allowed American troops to invade Cambodia. This sparked protests at many universities across the country, including Penn University. But the National Guard used guns to kill, causing the American people to direct their anti-war anger towards him. Just 5 days later, 100,000 people protested in Washington. Soon after, the protests gradually turned into riots. In the American military, the situation was no better, as soldiers either protested or engaged in chaotic activities. Indescribable as if heaven had fallen. General Carlton Ambrose during his inspection at the time also exclaimed, "Is this an army from hell or a mental hospital?" Officers feared commanding troops into battle and soldiers disobeying orders. What was happening? After the war ended and they returned home, the number of American casualties in Vietnam was higher than the total of all wars in the countries. In the Vietnam War, from 1961 to 1974, 57,259 Americans died in Vietnam, of which nearly 37,000 were no older than 21. That was truly a heavy blood tax for the American people, with 303,704 wounded in combat. The Pentagon also admitted that 20,000 Americans were definitely exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. About 700,000 American soldiers out of 2.7 million who served in Vietnam suffered from mental disorder. Hundreds of thousands of American soldiers and advisors developed cancer or had children with birth defects due to exposure to Agent Orange. More sadly, 70,000 to 300,000 American veterans committed suicide after returning home. In addition, 10% of American soldiers returning home after their time in Vietnam, because the bombs and bullets had left their will and spirit constantly tense. They had to use drugs to temporarily adapt to the bombs, smoke, and brutality before their eyes, associated with noble reasons, enduring such heavy physical sacrifices. It seemed that upon returning home, they would receive medals and welcoming hugs. But these soldiers only received contempt from their own countrymen. All the war obsessions and community contempt laid the foundation for a generation of criminals, with distorted and warped backgrounds in the 80s. The most typical example is serial killer Gardelion Dryway, a former U.S. Navy who served on a supply ship and participated in combat on the Vietnam Valley. Additionally, according to estimates, the amount the U.S. spent on the Vietnam War reached $173 billion, equivalent to $1.1 trillion at current price. This also indirectly affected the global economy at that time. In the United States alone, it led to unemployment, famine, and difficult lives. Thus, it can be seen that war is an obsession not only physically, but also directly impacts the spirit, persistently and perhaps haunting the lives of those who witnessed it firsthand. The consequences that war brings are truly terrifying. What about you? Leave a comment below to let D2T know. Thank you for listening. Goodbye and see you again. Subscribe to the Diego channel.
If this file opened your eyes, subscribe and open the next case.